All right,
All right, Lauren, I think you get to start.
All right, so my name's Lauren Kenworthy. Monica and I are both authors of the Unstuck and On Target curriculum. We're really excited that you guys are checking it out, looking at the training and looking at the curriculum. We're especially impressed that you're doing it in this particular year when we know that being a teacher or any kind of school staff is really just about the hardest thing on the planet. You guys are my superheroes. So fall 2021 and winter 2022. And so anything we can do to support you, we want to do, which is why we were excited to be able to do this coaching session together and thought we would introduce some ideas about how Unstuck might help with managing the incredible demands of Omicron and uncertainty. So I'm going to talk for a little bit. Monica's going to talk for a little bit. As Gary said, we'd love to have your comments throughout, but we're also going to make sure that we save a bunch of time for a real conversation towards the second half of the hour. So the next slide. One thing that Monica's going to talk you through is using these goal Y plan do checks, fillable GWPDCs. Gary's just stuck into the chat the link where you can go. It's also posted here on this slide to download an empty one so that you can follow along as we're talking and build your own plan A, B, and C for the crazy times ahead. Next slide. Before we dive into that, though, we're just going to touch on the fact that we think that this is a really good time to think about overload and the supports that we can put in place to prevent overload. We've got some examples of what that looks like for students. This also applies to school staff and psychologists and everybody else on the planet. So we'll try to make it as broad as we can. But from there, we'll dive into a little bit of a review of how to use the Plan A, Plan B and the feelings chain, as well as touching base on expecting the unexpected and some resources for doing Unstuck online. It'd be great if any of you all are doing Unstuck online or anticipating that you might go to virtual instruction, if you could stick that in the chat, and then we'll know to kind of emphasize that a little bit more. Next slide. So I think this time above all times, it's so helpful to stop and recognize that overload and overwhelm is a real thing. And in the training, we talk about it in terms of your students. And here along this y-axis on the left side of the page, you can see stress level goes up. Over time on this x-axis at the bottom of the page for students when they encounter demands, whether it's overstimulation or teachers who are having to reprimand them to try to be more in line with the expectations of the class, or difficult academic challenges, or a seatmate who's driving them nuts. These can increase their stress level. They can increase their experience of overwhelm until they get to that point there in the middle of the slide where they're overloaded. And what we know is that once you're overloaded, all of us get more of the bad things that we tend to be anyway. So if we're anxious, we get more anxious. If we're impulsive, we get more impulsive. And for some kiddos, that means they can go straight into meltdowns. For others, it means that they may go into shutdowns where they're just not available for learning. But in any case, you get decreased availability for learning and problem solving. And so this is clearly a state that everyone who works with kids, and especially educators, is seeking to avoid. Not the least because recovery takes a while. And I would think you all have had that experience of where you have a kid who gets overwhelmed and it's a long time before they're actually available to learn again. Recovery takes time. And then in the next slide, we see that when kids are overloaded, the adults around them tend to get overloaded too. It's a contagious phenomenon. So the power in avoiding overload in students is not just that we keep them available for learning and prevent them from eloping or doing those other things, but also that it enables teachers to maintain calm and presence in the classroom. And I would say right now, when we think about the stresses that we're all under just getting up each day, we're all at much higher risk of overload than usual. So we just wanted to start with some little friendly reminders about the fact that you start by supporting people where they are before you think about teaching them, because you want to avoid pushing them over the edge. And I would argue all of us over the edge. So what are those supports? What are those things that we want to have in place? Well, the next slide is kind of brings up that first fundamental component of Unstuck, which is that we can't help people, whether they are our students or our mothers-in-law or our spouses, if we get confused about what's a can't versus what's a won't. We need to be really clear about when kids or others are making choices to have negative behaviors versus when they're encountering a cognitive challenge, when they're encountering an executive function challenge that they really can't overcome at that moment. So here you can see Monica made these beautiful little cartoons of this teacher, looking at this student and saying they look really stuck. She could be saying they look really oppositional. They're not doing what I need. But instead, she's thinking maybe this guy is overwhelmed. And so my approach to him is going to be to think about how can I reduce the cognitive load at this point so we can pull back from that precipice and move forward. So she's saying, you look stuck. Can we make a plan B? Do you feel like you could do 2 problems instead of all 8? Or do you need a break right up front? So to kind of reach that kid where they are and recognize that if they are truly encountering a can't, they're not going to be able to recover until they get some additional supports. And I just want to add, this applies to all of us. As adults, we tend to be pretty hard on ourselves, and it's pretty easy to go home from work, whether it's the classroom or other setting, and think, I can't believe I did this, or, why wasn't I more alert and on top of that? And we too will be helped by recognizing that we might be more successful if we frame that as what was difficult about that situation for me. So we all need right now, especially right now, to be as kind as we can to others and as open about our own motivations as well as those of others, and recognize when a support is really in need. The next, another key support is talking less, writing more, and breaking it down. So this teacher here has asked a student to write a paragraph. It's not happening. The student is starting to show signs of overload and overwhelm. And so this teacher is going to switch to the plan B. And the plan B is going to involve writing down some very simple steps and starting with one of those coping strategies, so that we can, before we start to ask a student to process cognitive information, we're going to give them a chance to clear their mind and reduce their overall level of overwhelm. So take a breath. Write all your ideas in 5 minutes. Give it a very time-limited approach, and then take a break. And again, this is not such a bad idea for some of us grown-ups too, right? We have times when we want to think for ourselves about taking that deep breath, stopping and writing down what absolutely has to be done, and then making sure that there's a break on the other side of it. The next slide talks a little bit about making sure that those breaks are real. This, of all times, can be a really important one to think about regularly scheduled. Time, and you want to make that part of that predictable routine that your students can count on, that in between reader writer workshop, is that what that is? And lunch, we're going to have a little break time, and there's going to be some quiet de-stimulation of the students to help them manage the generally high level of stress that everybody's under. The next slide. And then you can also make a routine of those coping strategies that you've seen in Unstuck. You know, there can be some deep breathing, some imagining your favorite place, any of those coping strategies just built into the beginning of an academic task or before group gets started. And again, the adults in the room can participate in that as well. So I think that takes us to the next slide and moves us into this other piece that Monica was going to introduce about the goal-wide plans. And again, we're happy for you guys to comment or you know, interrupt or tell us you've already done it and it didn't work, or anything that you want to share as we go along, or you can save it for the end. It's up to you. Monica?
So I want to just give you a pause there. I think what's really important about these is to really reiterate that while you're speaking out loud that you need a plan B, that you need a coping strategy, and you're modeling for the student, you're also calming yourself down. And I think this is something that as educators, I think this year we all know, right? We're hanging on to the edge, right? But to let our students to model that and take some time for self-care, even as we're helping regulate our students, means that we're going to be able to keep on the right side of that curve. So one of the things is that we just want to remind you when you're implementing the intervention, that there are downloadable resources. This is actually something I admit I didn't know about in the book, but it's here now on the Unstuck and On Target website. But we're going to, at the end, we've also given some links. And really, we encourage you to download things. And I'm hoping you were able to download from that link at the beginning of the webinar, because what we're going to do in the next slide is start going through how we use this in real life. So next slide. All right, so these are the feelings chains, and they can be very powerful when they are used in really genuinely curious and problem-solving collaborative ways. And so that means that I want to remind you that the time to do a feelings chain is not when you're still, as the educator, in recovery, right? I want, you know, everyone needs to be calm, both the child and the student, because the idea of the first feelings chain that you generally do with the child is you're evaluating what went wrong, but extremely empathetically. And then what we do is we work in what could be a plan B in the future. And what's powerful about the feelings chain in general, especially for kids that don't often pause or struggle with being able to take other people's perspective, or one thing we hear a lot is he just doesn't realize the impact of his behavior on other people, is that it's first of all the event, the feeling, the action, how others feel in response to that action, what the consequence to the child is, and then what the feeling is to the child. And, you know, often our children, when they've had a meltdown, they don't want to feel that way. That's a really terrible way to feel. And we just empathetically say, you know, that could not possibly have been their goal. So next slide. So what we did is I sort of tried to think about what would be some fairly common issues you guys are confronting in classrooms and how you might use a goal-wide plan, do, check, or what we call the GWPDC, because everything needs an acronym, right? This is actually for when there is a substitute teacher. And I'm guessing that this is happening more frequently than you care to admit. And this is going to, the poor substitute also, honestly, who may have been actually recruited off the deep bench, as we know, because we're going pretty deep down our sub list these days, also is confronted with some children that are rigid and don't know how to manage having this pretty gigantic change of a sub in the classroom. So what we might say is that, you know, a teacher before, in advance, some random time, they don't have to anticipate they will be out. They just can say, you know, sometimes there are substitutes and we can't plan for them. And that's unexpected. And it can feel, right, overwhelming. But because we expect the unexpected here, let's just make a plan, right? And you can sit down with a child and, you know, you can help them make a plan to stay calm. And the reason they want to stay calmer is that they get to stay in class with friends. And you may want to motivate them with an external motivator at the end of the day if they can hold it together. I'm sure their parents are aware of the challenges and would be happy to collaborate with you on this. And then really for the sub and the teacher is you want to remind even a sub who's coming in pretty overwhelmed that if you make a connection early in the day with this child, you're going to have an easier day with this child, right? And so here are two different plans that I think you guys can read. But what they basically involve is the sub pulls out of her folder, oh, I see there's a GWPDC here, right? And I think you might have something to tell me. And we, at this point, this is a time where the kid may say something like, I hate unexpected things, right? They may come at you a little bit aggressively, but that's okay because they're saying what they need. And they're also saying that there's a plan here. And that's what we're going to reassure them with is the idea that there is a plan. And the teacher then knows what they're supposed to do, which is figure out how to make a connection with the child by asking them, what do they like? And we know that often giving our kids a couple of minutes to just talk about what they like can really be money in the bank, right? And then we all know that as educators, we're really good about getting in there and saying, oh my God, you know, Minecraft, tell me about your pig or whatever it is. I know nothing about Minecraft, but have a couple of stock things that I can say about Minecraft to connect with the students. And you can see how that goes, but there's also a plan B here. And then the last one is the plan C, which is that if, let's say this kid is an eloper, right? They run from the room. You've warned the sub where they're going and what the sub needs to do. So it's nice for everybody to just preview in advance. And it's a supportive thing to do. And one of the ways you might do this to get the student in is, next slide, please, is that you might have done a feelings chain with them beforehand, which is, you know, I hear there was a sub last week and you had kind of a rough time, right? And yeah, so you saw that sub. So tell me, what feelings did you have? And this would be a great time to have the feelings target and, you know, ask them where they are. And they may say, you know, angry, sad, worried, but like at a number 4, especially if they were running from the room, they're pretty escalated, right? That's not a time they could have made a plan. And you say, oh yeah, I heard you ran out of the classroom, like yelling as you went out. Sounds like you went out in a ball of fire, huh? And so, you know, others got really worried and upset. And I'm betting even some people were kind of a little annoyed and angry. Did you know, I just want you to know that's what happened. And this is the thing is we ended up playing chase and you ended up in the principal's office. Ugh, how did it feel, that whole thing? And they're going to be like, they're going to say something. If you're being empathetic, they're going to give you a pretty honest answer usually. And they ended up in a form. How I end this conversation with the child is generally, so I'm guessing that's not where you wanted to end up. Yeah, feeling angry, sad, and worried, and this whole thing. That sounds pretty awful. And so I think maybe we can think about a plan B. And that's when I would go to the next slide and say, let's just think about a different feelings chain, because that was a pretty scary situation to walk in and see a sub, right? I'm wondering if we made a GWPDC and handed it to the teacher right off the gate, out of the gate, and you told them that you really hate unexpected things, and we had a plan if that might go better, right? And I've got to tell you something really funny. You know what that teacher is going to think? And they're not going to know generally. You can provide them with this information, especially if they're autistic. They really honestly may have no idea. They've never been a teacher. They've never had a kid who's eloping. That's not in their ken. And you can just tell them, They are going to be so surprised and impressed by what a great self-advocate you are and how brave you are. And they are going to be ready to help. Right? Now, the child is likely to be more likely to engage in this. And then what you say, so the result is you're going to talk about, let's say Pokemon is their favorite thing. You're going to get to talk about Pokemon. Now, 2 minutes of Pokemon, they can get behind that. And they're still going to be a little unsettled, right? But they're going to be a little more optimistic and feel a little safer at a level 2, not right in the middle, but at a level 2. And at that level, we can make plans, right? One of the plans in our GWPDC was a secret signal to the teacher that they're struggling, that they're starting to get to overload. And it really makes me think about these kids. We so often hear, and I'm wondering if this ever happens to you, that you feel like your kids go from 0 to 60. Like you look over, they were doing fine, and suddenly they're on the ground or they're yelling at their peer. Does that ever happen to the kids you work with? Yeah. And I think what the idea is that we want to help our kids start to monitor themselves as they're escalating, right? They can just catch themselves, even if it's just before a meltdown. That's a victory. And we can help them get to a safe spot to decompress. That's victory. All right, next slide. So I'm not going to read this next one to you, but this is another one that you could download. You could use it. It's another example. It's also another format of a GWPDC, and one that is a little more complicated that you might use because it actually includes an evaluation of how the plans went. Right? And that's actually an important part of goal-wide plan, do, check. You might come back the next day after you show the child, after you had a sub, and say, hey, how did our plan go? And if it didn't go well, let's say your plans didn't work and they still had a meltdown and they ended up in the principal's office. Can anybody think of what you might say to the child? Got it? Got it? Anybody? I'm going to give you a clue. In Unstuck, there's usually one right answer, and it starts with, let's make a... Thank you, Paul. Thanks for bailing me out, buddy. Let's make a plan.
How do you know you heard me? I was trying to say it under my voice.
Yeah, I could see you mouthing it. I've gotten very good at lip reading because there's been so many you're muted moments on Zoom. So I think that's really important, that we can, the problem is always the plan, not the child, right? So it looks like we need to slow this down even more when you see a sub. Maybe you need to immediately go to the principal's office and start there, if that's going to work for you. All right, next slide. And these are just examples, once again, of the feelings chain. And this is where I would really underscore that if you are at all escalated when you're doing the feelings chain, I know how this is going to come out, because I've actually heard this come out of my mouth too, which is like, oh, for God's sakes, right? All we were trying to do was ask you to write a paragraph, and we ended up in this disaster. If that's the tone, you need a break. Right? And given that that's how actually about 15 minutes into being in a classroom, a lot of teachers are feeling these days. And that's why you saw one of the cartoons was, all I asked them to do was write a paragraph, right? We've written 5 million paragraphs this year. That's where the example is that's where modeling, taking a deep breath to calm the child down is actually a good plan for you too, right? Because you are understandably. So you want to do this first one in a very compassionate way. When you feel like you can dig into that place and be empathetic and take their perspective and hear them out. And then next slide, you can work together to do a plan B and think about how they can use the pause. How can they get a coping strategy in there to maybe do something a little different, right? And that's the collaborative element of this. All right, next slide.
Monica, before you go off that,
Yes.
There's one thing, if you go back the slide, you
Yep.
put it that I thought was really important on this one is that this GWPDC is if your student has a friend who's going to miss school because of COVID, right? So the kiddo is going to be angry and worried. And even with a good plan here, a GWPDC, and a plan for how he's going to manage that. And maybe the kid's going to take cookies to the sick kid's house and feel proud about that. Even with that, they're still going to be worried and sad. And that's where Monica has under the I feel at the end, that it's not like there's suddenly that all the bad feelings have to go away. It's that number 2. It's that now on the feelings target, we're at a manageable level because we've acknowledged the bad feelings. We've done what we can about it. And so we can manage it and move forward. And it's just a really important piece of these feelings chains, that we don't take away kids' feelings, that we acknowledge where they stand.
That's really important, Lauren. And I think that especially right now, our kids are walking around with a lot of these emotions, right? And they are sort of percolating at a 2, a 1, a 2, a 3. They're there. Whereas like, I don't know a lot of kids that were feeling sad and worried about their friend's health 3 years ago, right? And this is just a kind of baseline. And so just letting them have that, but also sending the message, and you can make a plan. It's just the magic of the word and. All right, next slide. Okay, so in the classroom, if you want to, or with students in pull out, I mean, I actually do a lot of talking with kids about how they're already being flexible. I mean, our kids have had, even our rigid, stuck kids have had to be so flexible in this over the past 2 years that I like to actually start with success. They're already doing it. They're already being flexible. And this is a really nice way to both get the sort of goal-wide plan, the plan A, plan B in place, and practice that skill, and also remind them that they're being pretty darn flexible, and sometimes flexible was fun and sometimes it wasn't so fun, right? And these are just some scenarios you could do with a kid if you have them, kiddo sitting in your office. All right, next slide. And then this is sort of the big message, I think, what we have right now, which is, I've heard all these wonderful, that we're languishing, that we're in COVID flux. There are all these wonderful terms that have been bandied about. But I think what it really is that we're all now in a position where we have to expect the unexpected. And we don't know what it's going to be. Right. But I think, first of all, letting kids know that they're not alone, and we've had a lot of unexpected things lobbed at us, and we're doing okay. Right. Mom and dad are still healthy. We're here in school. It doesn't look the same. We were flexible, but we're all still here because we keep making plans for the unexpected. But this idea of validating that this is hard for everybody. Okay. They're not alone. And the answer ultimately is just to keep reminding them that the way that this gets managed is you might get stuck because it's unexpected and it didn't feel good. But the way we've had to manage this is by being flexible. And then I am a big believer, and this is going to take us into sort of the last piece. So I actually had to deliver the Unstuck intervention online last year. I don't even want to talk about, it actually went way better than I thought it was going to be, the amount of prep time it took. But one of the things that was really wonderful about it is it made me really look for things to engage kids that normally I wouldn't. So, we now have a YouTube channel, and there's a link on the Unstuck and Untarget website to that YouTube channel. And it's got a lot of silly videos that I found on YouTube about unexpected things happening and people making plan Bs. It turns out actually that this is basically the plot line of pretty much every sitcom, everything that you laugh at out there. And if you can laugh a little bit at it, it's really a lot more fun. So can you go to the next one? And so also as a resource for you guys is I put all those, I use the Nearpod platform. It's free. You can just click on it. You don't have to download, register, anything. And those videos are actually in the Nearpod lessons, and you'll be able to tell what's the topic. And they're bookmarked at places where you could ask interesting questions that are unstuck questions, right? What's their plan B? But they're silly questions. They're dogs falling asleep in a bowl of water, right? Their puppies doing, there's actually a lot of dog videos, I'm not gonna lie. So a lot of things to sort of keep things laughing. And that's what I just sort of where I'd like to leave this is that whenever possible, if we can encourage our kids while they're learning how to be flexible, notice them doing funny things that are flexible, laughing with them is really a powerful teaching tool. If you ever come up with ideas of other ways that we can make our kids laugh while they're learning to be flexible, please let us know. Go straight up on the website. So, and that's basically what we prepared for you today. So we're wondering if you'd be interested in talking about your specific issues, concerns, what's going on in your classrooms. Because we'd love to know what's going on in your classrooms. I'm not going to lie to you. We really want to know what's going on in schools.
Well, I'm going to jump in. Here in Arlington Public Schools, we are in person. You know, we have, you know, our mitigations all in place and everything like that. But last year, before we went into, you know, the classroom, we were all virtual. And so the teachers, some of us teachers were able to teach in the building, but the students were at home. And I think that what happens is that we as teachers with our students, especially those that are on the spectrum, is that we have to learn to be flexible ourselves and also to laugh. Because I remember teaching a math lesson to my students, and the youngsters, suddenly I'm like watching him on his iPad. His iPad is going, and he is going up and down, up and down. And I went, "Where are you?" And he's like, "Mr. Mayor, I'm understanding how to divide and multiply, but I'm out here on my trampoline because I want to jump up and down." But yet he is doing 2 or 3 things all at one time, but yet still being able to focus on exactly what I was doing. I could not be on a trampoline and focusing on a teacher, but I'm finding our students are able to do multiple things at the same time. And we may, you know, someone on the outside may look at it like, why can't that student sit down? Why can't that student not walk around the room? Why can't that student, you know, do X, Y, and Z? But they're focused on what I'm doing, because if I ask them a question, they'll be able to tell me what the learning is happening. And so I do the same thing, even though now we're here in school, we don't have trampolines here. But if my students need to get up and walk around, I know by looking at them if they're engaged or not. I've known them so many, like some of the 5th graders I have now, when they were kindergartners, they were developmentally disabled until the age of 7, where we had to come up with a specific diagnosis. So I've known these kids since they were kindergarten. And so I can tell instantly by looking at them if they're engaged or not, whether or not they're walking around the room. And they know that our plan is not to disturb other students. They know the plan, but you know, they have that ability to have that movement that they need, but they're still focused.
So Paul, that is so powerful. And in Unstuck language, the goal is to learn. That's the real goal, right? And the teacher has a plan, and it's, you know, children sitting nicely at their desks, you know, doing the worksheet and, you know, giving plenty of space. And we have to be careful because as teachers, we get stuck sometimes in our plan. But if this child comes up with a plan B, that maybe the goal is to learn the material and let other people in the classroom work undisturbed, right? Let our friends work undisturbed. They could be doing an awful lot of things that are not sitting in their chair. And we actually, the more we learn about ADHD and autism, the more I think we are becoming respectful of the importance of things like movement in the process of being able to focus and learn. In autistic people, stimming, all sorts of things. And so you may need to make a plan with a child. I remember one of our classrooms one time, we put blue tape on the floor because this kid actually would have like walked all over the classroom. We put blue tape on the floor and we said, so this is the walking zone, right? And it was at the back of the classroom. But I mean, and that kid learned everything. And I swear to God, he must have put 20,000 steps a day on the back of that room. So I love that. And I love just sort of thinking through, I'm going to be flexible, make a plan B. I never thought of that plan B of walking in the back of the classroom, right? So that's fabulous modeling.
Thank you. And, just one more thing is that being, this is my 43rd year teaching special education. So
Wow.
I'm in year 43, but what I had to learn is I had to unlearn all of my traditional teaching moving forward to today's teaching, which is vastly different. And so I had to learn and change myself. In other words, I had to make my own plans in how I was going to navigate how I used to teach as whole group instruction only, to now where we have workshop models and, we have all this extra activity in the classrooms. But still, I'm looking at students are really learning now.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful.
That's what matters.
Yes. Oh, sorry about that.
Any other challenges people would like to ask about? Anybody want to go through the sort of the plan for those two plans that Monica put up, sort of how you would adapt it for your own students? Anything you don't like about Unstuck or that you find missing?
Oh, yeah. Hi.
Hi.
I think. I'm so excited to see you.
Yeah, thank you for having us. My name is Jihei Schwartz. I'm one of the counselors at Fairfax County Public Schools. I'm in an elementary school. I'm at two schools actually in Fairfax County. And it's been a really just, unusual year, of course. It's different. What I find different about this year as compared to past years is the number of needs, the amount of work that is expected. It's unbelievable, and there's so little time to plan for anything that this is my 15th year here, so I'm so grateful that I have my experience to lean on. I can't imagine being a first or second year teacher or a counselor and having all of these expectations put on me. And so I really have appreciated the Unstuck lessons. Right now I'm doing the Unstuck lesson with the old materials for now, with a couple of students, and then I'm planning on doing the Unstuck curriculum with the new materials for another school for a couple of students as well. And for me, my biggest challenge is, like I said, time and finding user-friendly lessons for this. I find that it just takes a lot of time to read through all the materials, to gather the materials, to make it user-friendly. So I was looking at the Nearpod lessons and they look really good. I'm trying to figure out what kind of format the Nearpod lessons are. It looks like, I don't think I've ever seen a format like this. It's not a Google slide or anything like that. And I plan to use those because they are so user-friendly. I can just kind of basically, I think my challenge is I know the materials, but making it user-friendly for the kids in a short amount of time because I see them for like 15, 20 minutes.
Right.
Session.
Well, I did do, I'm no technology, and we can talk offline if you like. I mean, I do have Google Slides. They start as Google Slides, and then you import them into Nearpod, and then Nearpod does something magical, and then you can do the other stuff. But like the matching games and the time to climb, all that actually is developed within Nearpod. You have to do it. I'm not going to lie to you. I did these as guided lessons. These were not independent lessons. So it's the warning I put at the beginning, which is you need to know the Unstuck curriculum pretty well in order to use these materials, because what I was doing was talking through the slides. I mean, this is not, I was saying, so, all right, we're going to be talking about plan A, plan B. Is anyone here had to make a plan B today? Right. And the kids on Zoom were responding back and forth. So it's a little bit of both. And I did the time to climb, which is this, in case you guys don't know, it's a game. And that's how I did the review for every week. And, we have every Unstuck lesson, we always have what do we call it? Lauren, help me out. The review. Lynn Cannon's word. I can't remember. Okay. Old. But so you can use them. I think what I'm a little concerned about, 15 or 20 minutes is not that long to do this. And I'm a little worried about the fact that you're so pressed for time. I'd be interested in talking to you a little bit about some hacks that I have for how, when I'm doing it in clinic, how I make it faster. I actually prepare, I call it Unstuck in a Box. And I'm happy to talk with you about how I do that, because you're right. We don't have time for a lot of material prep and a lot of things like that. And that can feel a little overwhelming. But I think a couple of hours of advanced prep, you can get Unstuck in a Box. And so I'm wondering if maybe we could facilitate that in some way with you. So let me think about that, because I get it. I've been in classrooms too. I know exactly what you're talking about.
The other thing that we would want to just add there is trust yourself. Curriculum is written in a way that, because we've found that, and we learned from teachers that it worked, but you guys know your students, and you don't have to do every step of the lesson. So, if your kids are coming in and they're sort of bouncing off the walls, just pull up the Pink Panther video, talk about plan A, plan B. And if you've introduced that concept, you've done an incredible thing that day for that class. You don't have to go through all the bells and whistles. Lightning round. Thanks.
That's it, Lauren.
Ayana. No, it's not from me. You got it right from one of the, is it Ayana?
Oh, thank you, Ayana. I'm so grateful.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So you don't have to go through the lightning round, which is reminding your students of what they learned last time. You don't have to do the paper and pencil task if, there's just too much. We're trying to give you a range of opportunities. And yes, it's ideal if you've got a calm 45 minutes and you get through everything, but take what you can use that day, and know that you're doing really good work. The core, the fundamental unit of the powerful unit in Unstuck is that self-regulatory language. And it's kids, just like Monica was saying, learning that it can be fun to use that language, that the grown-ups in their lives use it, and that if they can just engage in that in a way that, they see that you have some big deals in your life, or, it's really fun to come up with a plan G, then you've done your job.
Thank you so much, Laura and Monica. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And Lauren, that is so wise what you just said, because I think now that I think about it, you've actually helped me think metacognitively about what the process was that I went through, that's exactly right. There was a lot less teaching when I was doing the Nearpods, and a lot more just interacting with silly things and labeling them. Right? Just, looks like he's got it. Oh, I don't know if that's a good goal. We're going to see, right? Why would he have that goal? A lot of things like that. So I really appreciate that, Lauren. And I think you're really right. And I'm not going to lie to you, because I'm running a high school group right now. Those Pink Panther videos are pure gold They're all on YouTube. And I ran one with my high school group recently because they were really sluggish and out of sorts. We started group with one of them, and we had people laughing about the plans, throwing numbers on the feelings target, right? All sorts of really great things. And that's all we're trying to get at. And I think that's Lauren's exactly right. So in some ways, if you've got a magnet or you've got that poster of scripts, just watch the video with one eye on the poster. And whenever you can, just throw in an unstuck word. Oh my God, he's so stuck, right?
And while you guys are coming up with other questions, I just want to flag that we've got 3 folks on the video who are actually the people who are enabling you to have access to Unstuck this year, because they're really running this project, and they're the research coordinators who are getting you the materials and really want to be there to support you if you need anything. And they've been in the chat, but just to say, there's Jessica Smith on the DC Virginia side, Jess Holmes in Colorado, and Laura Campos also on the Virginia side. So they're joining because they really want to be supports. So make sure you let them know if there are follow-up resources that you need. Other challenges, questions, comments? Any funny Unstuck stories?
So one thought I do have when you're talking to teachers about this in classrooms, because they're also feeling stressed and overloaded by all the demands, just like you guys are trying to prepare materials, is remind them that even just looking at the handout, right, the home extended, the teacher extension, the classroom extension, we have found that this language is contagious. And it's contagious to the children, it's contagious to the teachers. And, you know, we did work very hard to grab from the vernacular words that felt logical. But if they just read that alone, they're already way ahead of the game. All right, Lauren. Well, as a former educator who is not envious of what you guys have been doing for the past 2.5 years now, thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for thinking about your students in flexible ways and being role models for flexibility too. And I would urge you to, whenever possible, take a deep breath. You know, start math class with the deep breath or whatever you need to do, because it's just going to help everybody in the room. And know that there are lots of us out there that are really deeply grateful for the work you're doing to keep schools open, right? Because it really matters, especially children that have neurodivergences. They really need you. So I don't mean this as a kind of thank you for your service thing. I know what it's like, and we're here to support you in any way you need support. So you have lots of email addresses, lots of ways to get in touch with us. You call and we will respond. Okay. And I'm going to look for my Unstuck in a Box, see if I can turn it into a checklist, okay? And then so that we can do it all at once. Because I do think, I jokingly, I do have it. I'll go and I'm going to see what's in that folder. And I'm going to take some pictures too, so you can see it.